calling it now, there's going to be someone in the comments who's like, social justice warrior, loser, idiot, bullshit. Just listen to what I have to say, because no, I'm not advocating for a whole lot, just the bare minimum. So I like a diverse, colorful cast in the fantasy series I read, and I get some backlash for this every time I bring it up. People asking why, it doesn't matter, you're a straight white dude, you shouldn't care, which that's the worst argument of them all. I want there to be diversity and equality in all aspects of society, so that's just a weird thing that just because it benefits me, I shouldn't care. What a horrible way to view this topic. But getting beyond that to just the fantasy genre itself, and why I think having a diverse cast list improves your overall story. Well, there's the myth that if you have a European set fantasy world, everyone should be all white. One, that's just weird. I don't agree with that, because I can believe there's a mixed bunch of races and sexualities and genders in a medieval setting just as easily as I can believe in dragons and magic. They're both not necessarily true or real, but guess what?
I'm suspending my disbelief.
And if you can't suspend disbelief of this one small thing, I think you got a problem you need to examine. Secondly, actually the ancient world was a pretty diverse place. It has been for a long time. Rome, for example, was incredibly diverse. Rome had populations from the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and just all blended and mixed together. That's how it worked. You could go from one to the next. Roman citizens traveled, expanded, and conquered. It was not an all-white Roman Empire. In fact, there were emperors who were not Roman themselves. That is just true. So then trying to turn around and bend some kind of logic to say, oh, well, I want my book to be accurate to the ancient world, so I'm making it this representation of how I view it, your representation's not correct. Yes, in the Middle Ages, things got less diverse because there was less travel happening, but once again, you're in a fictional world. You can change that. And I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying my personal preference here, and let's get a little deeper into why. So I enjoy a diverse cast list for a bunch of reasons, but the first and foremost, and honestly dumbest reason, it's easier for me to tell your characters apart. It's extremely daunting and difficult to tell Game of Thrones characters apart, for example. Even watching the TV show, I have difficulty going, wait, that bearded guy versus that bearded Scandinavian looking dude, who's that one? It's hard, especially the Northerners. I find them to be so uniform, it's scary and ridiculous. And if you compare that to something like Wheel of Time, which at its core is much more diverse, you have people who in culture and race are clearly representing Asia, Africa, the Middle East, across the spectrum. Robert Jordan was incredibly inclusive and sometimes flipped up what their cultures versus race was like. Example being the Shanchan, and I actually appreciated that. I thought that was pretty neat and something I hadn't seen before. The Aiel and Shanchan, for example, you can't really confuse the two. One, because their cultures are like polar opposite, and two, the people look different. I like that. It makes your world feel bigger. It makes the scope of what's happening feel grander, and in some ways the stakes higher. If it's affecting people cross-continental and all these people are communicating and talking, there must be some big shit going on. And a lot of people who are against this idea will bring up the argument that you only want diversity so that people can feel connection to characters, but they should be able to feel connection to any character regardless of race, sexuality, or gender. And yeah, I don't disagree with that. I feel connections to black characters, white characters, Asian characters, gay characters, trans characters. It doesn't affect me at all. I certainly do feel that connection in certain ways. It's not about that. It's just raw representation, and it matters. The adult reader, yes, they can feel that connection to anyone. It doesn't really matter. But to younger kids, especially children, to preteens, to maybe even early teens getting into these books, having that more raw connection of seeing something about you that maybe in society has caused issues before, having that represented as a positive or maybe just a average normal thing in this fantasy book you love can feel really good or have a positive psychological impact for that child. And on that level, I really enjoy it when I meet a character who is gay or a race that is oppressed in modern society or dealing with issues that I can just feel connection to, like anxiety, for example. I feel like that's a positive reflection for someone to have. And I don't think it should ever be the defining characteristic of that character. This is very often seen with gay characters, especially in fantasy. It just becomes everything about them is that they're gay, and that's their whole arc, is them dealing with their homosexuality, or society dealing with their homosexuality. And that is very counterproductive. Instead of having just a positive example, you're now going to have a large portion of your entire book be about this thing that might alienate readers. It could be represented poorly and even offend people you're trying to help and represent positively. Just have it be an aspect of who they are and let that be there. Don't make it this huge ordeal. The best representation is just showing it as a normal thing. And I'm certainly not saying every story that makes the arc of a character about their sexuality or race or whatever is inherently bad. I'm not at all. I'm not in any way. It can be done very well, but you can tell the difference easily between a well-done arc about being gay and a very poorly done arc about being gay. And Black Panther is a very good example of this. It was very African. The culture and heritage, the way people talked, to the accents, was all very African, but the main story had nothing to do with that. You could take that same plot line and plop it down in Asia or Europe and just have a hidden country or kingdom that has had this same line going through, and it wouldn't really impact the overall story. It would just change the aesthetics of what's happening. And I like that. And I was worried going into Black Panther that they could really ham-fist it and make it corny and not really relatable to anybody, but they handled it very well. It became much more of a story about being human and feeling compassion for fellow humans across the world. This kind of humanitarian viewpoint was a wonderful message for the story to have. But the final thing I hear very often when I bring this up is, well, I don't know how to write for a black character, I'm white. Or I don't know how to write for a gay character, I'm straight. Or I don't know how to write for a straight character, I'm gay even. I'm sure that could be an argument and a thing that someone has said in the past. If that's how you feel, you should really step back and take a look at how you view these certain aspects or traits a person can have, because it's shaping how you think of them as a person to their core. And that's not a good thing. Just because someone is Asian shouldn't change how you fundamentally view them all the way down. It's just an aspect of who they are. Probably a fairly significant thing that's changed and shaped who they are, but you can still connect and relate to them as a human being and understand their motivations and personality. We're not suddenly a different species just because there's one different trait of our personhood. And writing for them should be that simple. It shouldn't change who they are fundamentally to the point where you can't even attempt to write a black character? Really? I don't think many people who say this actually think they couldn't write for a minority character. I think what they're trying to do is avoid offending someone. They're afraid that if they wrote a character that's in a certain minority group, it would turn around and bite them. People would get offended at how that minority was represented. And again, as long as you handle it tactfully, especially if you don't make it a huge part of who they are, which I don't really think in most adult stories it should be, you're fine. Unless you're trying to set out to write a story that's about race or sexuality, just make it an average thing about your character. It seems elementary that I have to say this, but yes, just because someone has one different trait from you doesn't mean you can't write for them. It's the equivalent of me saying I can't write for someone with black hair, I'm a blonde. Yeah, you can. We're all people. Just because someone is different doesn't mean it shapes everything about them. You're lumping these people together in what I find to be not offensive, but just kind of an ignorant way. That's my views and takes on having more of a diverse cast list in fantasy books. And just because I know there's going to be some people who are upset that I said race or sexuality is only the trait of a person, they feel like it's something bigger. I include many things in traits of a person. It's a fairly large, all-encompassing thing. And yes, certain traits can be hugely influential to who you are as a person. Religion, for example, is a trait a person has, whether or not they're religious. But every person has so many different traits mixed in together. Even the big ones don't fully define who you are. And no one trait has a link between every individual that shares that trait. For example, Christians can join the Ku Klux Klan, or they can be super progressive, nice people who just love everyone because they actually follow what Jesus preached. And I find that to be a great example. Gay people can be huge assholes. I've met gay people I hate, or they can be literally my best friends. I've met people who have almost every trait you can think of, and no trait fully defines someone. That's the point of this video. That's the whole last 10 minutes recapped in one sentence. So that's why I like some diversity in my writing. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm sure I've upset and offended some of y'all. That's fine. And feel free to dislike and unsubscribe and leave an angry message in the YouTube comment section. There's lots of those too. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.